Bring her to me. The words rolled across the ballroom like distant thunder. Conversations died mid-sentence. Crystal glasses paused halfway to waiting lips. Even the string quartet in the corner seemed to lose its rhythm for a heartbeat. More than 400 guests turned toward the same person at once. Naomi Carter froze beside a silver tray filled with sparkling water. She had spent the entire evening doing exactly what was expected of her, moving quietly, smiling politely, remaining invisible. Now every eye in the room was locked on her. The Grand Regent Hotel stood in the heart of downtown Chicago, its 42nd floor ballroom glowing beneath chandeliers that looked like waterfalls made of gold. The annual Whitmore Foundation Gala was the kind of event people talked about for months. Governors attended. Fortune 500 executives attended. Celebrities attended. Invitations were worth more than some people's monthly rent. At the center of it all stood Ethan Whitmore, the billionaire CEO whose name carried weight in every boardroom in America. Tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, he stood beneath the spotlight with one hand resting lightly on the podium. His expression revealed nothing. No smile. No anger. No explanation. Just those 4 words. Bring her to me. A nervous murmur spread through the crowd. Naomi felt it immediately. The whispers. The assumptions. The curiosity. People glanced at one another as though trying to solve a puzzle before anyone else could. Had she spilled something? Had she offended a donor? Had she accidentally interrupted an important conversation? The questions multiplied faster than answers. Near the stage, the banquet manager's face lost color. He hurried toward Naomi, forcing a smile that looked painfully unnatural. "Mr. Whitmore wants to see you," he said quietly. Naomi nodded, though her stomach tightened. Around her, guests subtly stepped aside. The path toward the stage seemed to stretch forever. Every polished marble tile reflected the light overhead. Every step felt louder than the one before it. She could feel people watching, judging, guessing, waiting. But none of them knew Naomi Carter. None of them knew that she had worked double shifts for nearly a year to help pay for her younger brother's college tuition. None of them knew she attended online business classes after midnight, when most of the city was asleep. None of them knew that every tip she earned went into a savings account, with one goal written on the first page of a worn notebook sitting in her apartment drawer. Open my own community cafe. A place where everyone feels seen. Naomi wasn't the type to complain. Life had taught her that dignity often arrived quietly. Sometimes it wore comfortable shoes and carried heavy trays. Sometimes it looked like showing up every day when nobody noticed. Tonight, she thought this would be another invisible shift. She was wrong. Ethan Whitmore watched her approach from across the room. The billionaire's face remained unreadable. That only made the crowd more nervous. His reputation followed him everywhere. Newspapers called him a visionary. Competitors called him relentless. Employees called him demanding. The media called him the man who never wasted words. Which made this moment even stranger. Because Ethan Whitmore was not known for stopping an entire gala over a waitress. Naomi reached the foot of the stage and stopped. The room had become so quiet, she could hear the soft hum of the hotel's ventilation system above the chandeliers. Ethan looked directly at her. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. The silence stretched tighter and tighter. Somewhere in the crowd, someone nervously cleared their throat. Then Ethan finally spoke. "Miss Carter," he said calmly, "do you remember what happened outside this hotel at exactly 3:17 this afternoon?" And just like that, every person in the ballroom realized they had been asking the wrong question all night. Naomi blinked. For a moment, she wondered if she had heard him correctly. 3:17 that afternoon. The exact time landed with the precision of a courtroom question. Around her, hundreds of guests leaned forward in silent anticipation. Ethan Whitmore remained perfectly still beneath the chandelier light, his gaze steady, his voice calm. Naomi searched her memory. The afternoon had been a blur of deliveries, last-minute preparations, and staff rushing through the hotel like clockwork before the gala began. Then something surfaced. A small moment. Ordinary at the time. Easy to forget. Outside the North Entrance, Ethan continued. "Do you remember?" Naomi slowly nodded. The memory became clearer. Earlier that day, she had stepped outside during a short break. The autumn wind had swept through downtown Chicago, carrying leaves across the sidewalk and pushing cold air between the glass towers surrounding the hotel. Most guests arriving for the gala had entered through the main entrance, where cameras flashed and luxury vehicles lined the curb. The north entrance was quieter, almost forgotten. That was where she had noticed him. An older boy, maybe 12 years old, standing alone near the loading area. He looked nervous. Not dangerous, just nervous. His backpack seemed unusually heavy. He kept glancing around as if searching for someone. Naomi remembered approaching him because something felt off. Not threatening, just sad. The kind of sadness that appears when someone feels completely alone. He looked lost, Naomi said softly. A ripple moved through the crowd. Ethan nodded. Continue. Naomi swallowed. I asked if he needed help. The ballroom remained silent. She remembered offering him a bottle of water from a catering cart. The boy had hesitated before accepting it. Then he admitted he was supposed to deliver a package to someone attending the gala, but could not find the right entrance. His phone battery had died. He seemed overwhelmed. Naomi had pointed him toward the security desk instead of letting him wander through restricted areas. She had even walked him halfway there before returning to work. The entire interaction had lasted maybe 4 minutes. 5 at most. Nothing remarkable. Nothing worthy of stopping a gala attended by some of the most powerful people in America. That is all, Naomi said. I helped him find security. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Some seemed disappointed. Others looked even more curious. Ethan Whitmore studied her face carefully. And did he tell you what was inside the package? Naomi shook her head. No, sir. Ethan glanced toward a man standing near the edge of the stage. The hotel's head of security stepped forward, holding a slim black folder. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The confusion that had filled the room moments earlier gave way to something else. Suspense. The security chief opened the folder and removed a photograph. Even from several feet away, Naomi could see the image showed the same backpack. Ethan addressed the audience for the first time since calling Naomi forward. Every person in this room believes tonight is about philanthropy, he said. What most of you do not know is that earlier today our company was targeted by someone attempting to gain access to confidential information. The ballroom erupted into stunned whispers. Naomi's eyes widened. She looked from the photograph to Ethan and back again. None of this made sense. She had simply helped a lost boy. Nothing more. Yet as Ethan lowered his eyes toward her, she realized the story she remembered was only the beginning. The whispers spread through the ballroom faster than wildfire through dry grass. Investors leaned toward one another. Reporters exchanged confused glances. Several guests quietly pulled out their phones, not to record, but to search for answers that did not yet exist. Naomi stood motionless at the foot of the stage, feeling as though the entire room had shifted beneath her feet. She had expected embarrassment. She had expected criticism. She had even prepared herself for the possibility of losing her job. She had not expected to become the center of a mystery involving one of the most powerful companies in the country. Ethan Whitmore accepted the photograph from the head of security and held it up for the audience to see. The image showed the backpack the boy had carried earlier that afternoon. It looked ordinary. Worn straps. Faded fabric. Nothing about it suggested importance. Nothing about it suggested danger. That was exactly the point. Most people never look twice at something ordinary, Ethan said. His voice remained calm, but every word carried across the ballroom. That is why it almost worked. Naomi listened carefully. She remembered the boy's nervous expression, the way he kept checking over his shoulder, the way he seemed relieved when she offered help. Looking back now, she realized there had been something else in his eyes. Fear. Not the fear of being caught. The fear of disappointing someone. Ethan placed the photograph onto the podium. Security discovered a concealed electronic device inside that backpack. A wave of surprise moved through the crowd. The device was designed to connect to private networks operating inside this building during tonight's event. The room grew quieter with every sentence. Naomi could see executives sitting perfectly still, their expressions changing from curiosity to concern. Ethan continued. The boy carrying it never understood what he was transporting. Naomi looked up. That detail struck her immediately. She had sensed it from the beginning. The boy had not seemed malicious. He had seemed overwhelmed. Young. Pressured. Lost. Ethan nodded as if reading her thoughts. He was hired online. Promised easy money. Told to deliver a package and leave. The billionaire paused. Nothing more. Several guests lowered their eyes. The story suddenly felt less like a corporate security issue and more like something human. Something sad. Naomi remembered offering the boy water. She remembered asking if he was okay. Nobody else had stopped. Hundreds of people had passed him that afternoon. Expensive suits. Important schedules. Important meetings. Yet nobody had noticed him standing there alone. Nobody except her. Ethan slowly stepped away from the podium. For the first time all evening, he moved without the protection of the stage. His polished shoes echoed softly across the marble floor as he descended the steps toward Naomi. The room watched every movement. Security footage shows that after speaking with Miss Carter, the boy changed direction. Ethan stopped several feet away from her. Instead of entering through an unsecured service corridor, he followed her instructions and reported directly to hotel security. A collective breath seemed to leave the room at once. Naomi stared at him. She had never known. Not once during her shift had she imagined that a brief conversation outside could alter the course of an event attended by governors, business leaders, and billionaires. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on hers. If he had entered through that corridor, nobody would have questioned him. Silence filled the ballroom. Heavy, uncomfortable, honest. Then Ethan said something that caused several guests to lower their heads. A room full of influential people walked past that young man today. They saw a backpack. They saw an inconvenience. Miss Carter saw a person. Naomi felt her throat tighten. The crowd that had assumed the worst only minutes earlier now looked at her differently. Yet Ethan's expression suggested the story was still far from over. Because hidden behind his calm demeanor was a question he had not yet asked. And hidden inside that answer was the reason he had spent months searching for the woman standing before him tonight. Naomi could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing against her, yet somehow the room felt smaller now. The chandeliers still sparkled overhead. The musicians still stood frozen beside their instruments. The city lights still stretched across the Chicago skyline beyond the towering windows. But everything seemed distant compared to the question hanging silently between her and Ethan Whitmore. Why had he spent months looking for her? Ethan folded his hands in front of him and glanced briefly toward the audience before returning his attention to Naomi. Most people believe leadership is about intelligence, he said. Some believe it is about power. Others believe it is about money. His voice was steady and measured. I used to think that too. The statement surprised the room. Ethan Whitmore rarely spoke about himself. He was famous for discussing markets, innovation, and strategy. Personal reflections were not part of his public image. The audience listened carefully. 3 months ago, Ethan continued, our company launched a nationwide initiative. We wanted to identify individuals with exceptional judgment. Not executives. Not consultants. Ordinary people. Confused whispers spread through the crowd. Naomi frowned slightly. She had no idea where this was going. Ethan nodded toward the massive screen behind the stage. Instantly, a new image appeared. It showed a crowded city street. The timestamp displayed a date from 3 months earlier. Naomi immediately recognized the location. It was only 4 blocks from her apartment. The footage showed a rainy afternoon. Pedestrians hurried past beneath umbrellas. Most kept their heads down, focused on reaching their destinations. Then the camera zoomed in. A man sat alone on a bench. His clothes looked worn. His posture suggested exhaustion. People walked by without slowing down. Dozens of them. Some glanced briefly before continuing on their way. Naomi's eyes widened. She remembered that day. Ethan spoke again. The man on that bench was not homeless. The audience remained silent. He was one of our senior researchers participating in a social behavior study. The image changed. Now the screen showed Naomi approaching the man. She stopped beside him, sat down, spoke with him, then disappeared into a nearby cafe, before returning several minutes later carrying a warm meal and a cup of coffee. Gasps quietly moved through the ballroom. Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had never told anyone about that afternoon. To her, it had not seemed important. The researcher had looked tired and hungry. Helping him had felt natural. Nothing more. You were observed several times over the following months, Ethan said. Different locations, different situations, different people. Another image appeared. Then another. Then another. Naomi helping an elderly woman carry groceries during a snowstorm. Naomi staying late after work to help a lost tourist contact her family. Naomi returning a designer wallet filled with cash without accepting any reward. Each photograph felt like a page from a diary she never knew existed. The room grew quieter with every image. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked inspired. Many simply looked stunned. Ethan finally took a slow breath. Every person we monitored knew they were being evaluated eventually. He paused. Except you. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. The billionaire's expression softened for the first time all evening. Not dramatically, just enough for the audience to notice. Miss Carter, you passed every test without ever knowing there was a test. The ballroom fell completely silent. Then Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and removed a small white envelope. The sight of it instantly changed the atmosphere once again, because everyone in the room could tell that whatever was inside that envelope was about to change Naomi Carter's life forever. The envelope seemed impossibly small for something capable of changing a person's future. Yet every eye in the ballroom followed it. Naomi stared at the crisp white paper in Ethan Whitmore's hand while 1,000 possibilities raced through her mind. A certificate, a check, a letter, a mistake. Whatever it was, she felt certain it did not belong to someone like her. Not in a room like this. Not surrounded by people whose watches cost more than her annual rent. Ethan took another step forward. The distance between them was now barely 6 feet. Close enough for Naomi to notice details the cameras never captured. The faint exhaustion behind his eyes. The careful way he measured each word. The weight of responsibility carried by a man the world often described as untouchable. 3 months ago, Ethan said, our foundation began searching for someone. The audience remained silent. Not the smartest person. Not the wealthiest person. Not the most connected person. He glanced around the ballroom. We were searching for character. The statement landed heavily. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Character was not something usually discussed at events built around influence and status. It could not be purchased. It could not be inherited. It could not be displayed on a balance sheet. Ethan slowly handed the envelope to Naomi. Her fingers trembled slightly as she accepted it. The room seemed to hold its breath. Open it, he said. Naomi looked at the envelope, then at Ethan, then back at the envelope. She carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single folded letter. The paper felt unusually thick, expensive, formal. She unfolded it slowly. Her eyes moved across the first line, then the second, then the third. Suddenly she stopped breathing. The ballroom disappeared. The lights disappeared. The crowd disappeared. For several seconds, there was only the letter. Ethan watched her reaction carefully. The audience watched it too. Naomi blinked once, then twice. Her eyes widened. This cannot be real, she whispered. A murmur swept across the room. Ethan nodded gently. It is real. Naomi looked down again to make sure she had not misunderstood. The letter offered a full scholarship to one of the most respected business leadership programs in the country. Tuition, housing, travel expenses, professional mentorship, everything covered. Every obstacle she had spent years trying to overcome had suddenly been removed from the path ahead. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. Not because of the money, not because of the opportunity, because someone had noticed. For years she had worked quietly, helped quietly, sacrificed quietly, dreamed quietly. Most of the time it felt like the world rewarded the loudest voices while people like her remained invisible. Yet somehow, someone had been paying attention. The crowd erupted into applause. At first it came from a few tables, then more, then nearly the entire ballroom. The sound rolled through the room like a wave. Naomi lowered the letter and looked around in disbelief. Some guests were smiling. Others appeared deeply reflective. A few seemed embarrassed by assumptions they had made earlier that evening. Ethan waited until the applause softened. Then he spoke again. That scholarship is only the beginning. The room immediately became quiet. Naomi looked up. Ethan's expression had changed. There was still warmth in his eyes, but now there was something else. Purpose. Determination. The kind of look that appears just before an even bigger revelation. And when he reached into his jacket pocket a second time, Naomi realized the envelope had never been the real reason he had called her forward. The second item Ethan removed from his jacket was not an envelope. It was a small black key card embossed with a silver logo. At first, nobody in the room understood what they were looking at. Naomi certainly did not. She still held the scholarship letter in both hands, struggling to process what had already happened. The applause had faded, but the emotion remained. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation. Ethan held up the card for the audience to see. 6 years ago, he said, I started Whitmore Labs with 12 people in a rented office above a hardware store. A few guests smiled. Most had heard versions of the story before. Ethan rarely spoke about those early days. Back then, we did not hire based only on resumes. We hired people who could be trusted when nobody was watching. He paused. As the company grew, that became harder. Naomi listened carefully. Something in his tone told her this was not a prepared speech. This was personal. Ethan slowly turned toward her. Miss Carter, over the past 3 months my team has evaluated thousands of applicants for a new leadership initiative. The giant screen behind him illuminated once again. This time it displayed a sleek modern building overlooking Lake Michigan. The audience immediately recognized it. It was the future headquarters of Whitmore Community Ventures, a division expected to manage hundreds of millions of dollars in educational and neighborhood development projects across the country. Excited whispers spread through the ballroom. Ethan nodded toward the image. This facility opens in 90 days. Naomi stared at the screen. She had read articles about the project online. Everyone had. Industry experts called it one of the most ambitious community investment programs in America. We interviewed former executives. Ethan continued. Nonprofit leaders, policy advisors, consultants. His eyes shifted back to Naomi, and yet none of them demonstrated the one quality we needed most. The room fell silent again. Ethan raised the black key card slightly. The ability to see people before seeing status. Naomi felt her heartbeat quicken. She had no idea where this was leading, but every instinct told her her life was standing at a crossroads. Ethan stepped closer and extended the card toward her. This is your access credential. Confusion flashed across her face. Several guests exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan smiled faintly. It was the first genuine smile many people in the room had ever seen from him. Beginning next month, if you choose to accept, you will join Whitmore Community Ventures. Naomi blinked. Surely she had misunderstood. Ethan continued before she could speak. Not as an assistant. Not as support staff. Not as an intern. The audience leaned forward. As a paid leadership fellow working directly with our executive team while completing your business program. Audible gasps echoed across the ballroom. Naomi's eyes widened. The position was prestigious, highly competitive, life-changing. She knew enough about business to understand that opportunities like this rarely appeared even for graduates of elite universities. Yet Ethan was offering it to her. The room remained frozen as Naomi stared at the card in disbelief. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of immediately reaching for it, she looked at Ethan and quietly asked, "Why me?" The question was so simple, so honest, yet it seemed to strike every person in the ballroom. Because beneath the luxury, beneath the titles, beneath the wealth, everyone suddenly wanted to hear the answer. For several seconds, Ethan Whitmore did not answer. The silence settled over the ballroom like fresh snow, soft but impossible to ignore. Naomi stood holding the scholarship letter in one hand while the black access card remained suspended between them. Her question lingered in the air. Why me? It was not false modesty. It was genuine confusion. She looked around the room and saw people who seemed far more qualified. Executives with decades of experience. Investors who managed fortunes. Graduates from prestigious universities. Compared to them, she was a waitress finishing another long shift. Ethan slowly lowered his hand. His expression grew thoughtful. Because every other candidate told us who they were, he said quietly. You showed us. The audience listened carefully. Nobody moved. Nobody checked their phones. Nobody whispered. Ethan turned toward the giant screen behind him. A new image appeared. This time it showed a small neighborhood grocery store captured by a security camera. Naomi recognized it immediately. It was located 3 blocks from her apartment. She had visited it hundreds of times. The footage showed a winter evening. Snow drifted across the parking lot. Inside the store, a woman stood at the checkout counter with 2 young children. The mother looked embarrassed. She examined the total on the register and quietly began removing items from her cart. Milk, bread, fresh fruit. The children watched silently. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. She remembered that day. Ethan continued speaking. Our team reviewed thousands of hours of footage during this project. The image on the screen showed Naomi stepping forward. She paid the remaining balance without introducing herself, without making a speech, without waiting for recognition. Then she left before the woman could properly thank her. Several guests lowered their eyes. Ethan changed the image again. Another scene appeared. A crowded bus stop during heavy rain. An elderly man standing alone without an umbrella. Naomi approached and handed him hers before walking away into the storm herself. Another image. Another act of kindness. Another moment no one knew had happened. Not because she hid them, because she never thought they mattered. The room grew increasingly quiet. Ethan looked toward the audience. Most people behave differently when they know someone important is watching. He paused. Character is what remains when nobody is. Those words landed with unusual force. The room was filled with successful people, yet many of them suddenly seemed uncomfortable. Because wealth could buy influence. Power could buy attention. Neither could purchase integrity. Ethan faced Naomi once more. You never asked what people could do for you. His voice softened. You asked what you could do for them. Naomi blinked away tears. She thought about her mother. The lessons she had heard growing up. The long evenings when money was tight and life felt unfair. Her mother always repeated the same thing. Be kind because it is right, not because it is rewarded. Naomi had tried to live that way. She simply never expected anyone to notice. Ethan slowly smiled again. Do you know what surprised us most? Naomi shook her head. Not one of those moments involved someone powerful. He gestured toward the audience. No celebrities. No executives. No cameras. No opportunity for personal gain. The ballroom remained silent. Ethan's next words seemed to echo through every corner of the room. You treated strangers with dignity because you believed they deserved dignity. Naomi felt tears finally escape despite her efforts to remain composed. Around the ballroom, many guests appeared emotional as well. The story had stopped being about a scholarship. It had stopped being about a job. It had become something deeper. A reminder. A challenge. A mirror. Then Ethan took a slow breath and said something that caused every head in the room to turn toward him at once. There is one more thing you do not know. And judging by the look in his eyes, it was the revelation he had been building toward all night. The room seemed to shrink around Ethan's final words. One more thing. After everything that had already been revealed, nobody could imagine what remained. Naomi stood frozen beneath the chandelier light, still holding the scholarship letter, still clutching the black access card she had not fully accepted was real. Across the ballroom, executives who spent their lives negotiating billion-dollar agreements sat in complete silence. Ethan Whitmore walked slowly back toward the stage. Not because he needed the spotlight, because the next part of the story belonged to more than just him and Naomi. It belonged to everyone in the room. He pressed a button on a small remote. The giant screen behind him changed once again. This time the image that appeared was not a photograph. It was a handwritten page. The paper looked old. The edges were worn. The handwriting was careful and elegant. Naomi stared at it without recognition. Ethan's voice softened. 3 years ago, our foundation received an anonymous letter. The audience watched the screen. No return address. No signature. No request for recognition. Ethan nodded toward the page. Most donations come with expectations. This one came with instructions. The image zoomed in. A sentence became visible. Several guests leaned forward to read it. If this money can help someone who feels invisible, please use it for them. Naomi's eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. Ethan looked directly at her. Do you remember sending $50 to a community scholarship fund 3 years ago? The question hit her like a wave. She remembered. She had almost forgotten because the amount seemed so small. At the time she was working 2 jobs. $50 had represented a week of careful budgeting. She had mailed it after learning about a local student who could not afford textbooks. She never expected anyone to notice. Ethan continued. That scholarship fund eventually merged with one of our education initiatives. The ballroom remained completely silent. We kept the letter because nobody could understand why someone with so little would give away money they clearly needed themselves. Naomi felt tears forming again. The memory returned with startling clarity. She had been sitting alone in her apartment when she wrote that note. Her rent was due. Her savings account was nearly empty. Yet she kept thinking about the student. So she sent the money anyway. Then she forgot about it and continued with life. Ethan slowly smiled. When our research team began reviewing candidates, one of them found that letter. He paused. The handwriting matched employment records from this hotel. A murmur swept through the audience. That was the moment we realized every act of kindness we had documented belonged to the same person. Naomi lowered her head, overwhelmed. The scholarship, the leadership fellowship, the evaluations, the observations. None of it had started 3 months ago. It had started years earlier with a decision nobody knew she had made. Ethan took a deep breath and addressed the room. Tonight is not about rewarding perfection. His voice echoed through the ballroom. It is about recognizing character. Then he turned back toward Naomi. You asked why you. The billionaire's expression grew warm. Because when nobody was watching, when there were no cameras, no titles, no opportunities, and no rewards, you became the kind of person this world desperately needs more of. The silence that followed felt different from every silence before it. It was not suspense. It was understanding. And for the first time all evening, the people in that ballroom were no longer looking at a waitress standing beneath the lights. They were looking at a leader. For a moment, nobody moved. The ballroom stood suspended in a rare kind of silence, the kind that appears when people realize they have witnessed something they will remember for the rest of their lives. Naomi remained standing near the center of the room, still trying to absorb everything that had happened. The scholarship letter rested against her chest. The black access card remained in her hand. Yet neither felt as significant as the words she had just heard. Across the ballroom, guests who had arrived expecting another elegant evening of speeches and networking now sat quietly reflecting on their own lives. The city lights beyond the windows shimmered against the dark Chicago sky. Inside, something had changed. Ethan Whitmore slowly stepped back toward the podium. He looked out across the crowd and took a long breath. Tonight, he said, many people expected me to announce a new investment. A few guests smiled softly. Others expected a partnership, a business expansion, another headline. He glanced toward Naomi. Instead, I wanted to tell a different story. The room listened. Because the future does not belong only to people with resources. His voice carried clearly through the ballroom. It belongs to people with values. Several guests nodded. Others lowered their eyes. The lesson felt simple, yet powerful. Ethan looked toward Naomi once more. 3 years ago, she gave away money she could have used herself. He paused. 3 months ago, she helped a frightened boy nobody else noticed. Another pause. For years, she treated strangers with dignity without expecting anything in return. The billionaire smiled. That is leadership. A wave of applause rolled through the ballroom. This time it sounded different from before. It was not polite. It was not ceremonial. It was genuine. People rose from their seats one by one. Then entire tables stood. Then nearly the entire room. The standing ovation continued longer than anyone expected. Naomi looked around in disbelief. Earlier that evening, she had moved silently between those same tables carrying trays and refilling glasses. Many of these guests had never looked directly at her. Now they were standing in respect. Not because she had become wealthy. Not because she had gained status. Because they finally understood her value. Tears filled her eyes again. She thought about the countless mornings she had left for work before sunrise. The nights spent studying after exhausting shifts. The sacrifices. The disappointments. The moments when nobody seemed to notice how hard she was trying. Somehow, every one of those moments had led here. Ethan waited for the applause to settle. Then he extended his hand. Naomi hesitated for only a second before accepting it. The cameras flashed. The audience cheered once more. Yet the most important part of the evening was not captured by any photograph. It was the realization spreading quietly through the room. The realization that greatness often arrives without an announcement. It does not always sit at the head table. It does not always wear expensive suits. Sometimes it carries a serving tray. Sometimes it works the late shift. Sometimes it walks through life unnoticed until the right moment reveals who it has been all along. As the evening drew to a close, guests slowly began leaving the ballroom. Conversations filled the room once again, but they sounded different now. Softer, more thoughtful, more human. And while newspapers would eventually report on scholarships, fellowships, and business initiatives, those headlines would miss the most important truth. The most influential person in the room had never been the billionaire standing beneath the spotlight. It had been the young woman who chose kindness when nobody was watching. Because power can command a room. Wealth can attract attention. Status can open doors. But character does something far rarer. Character changes lives. And on that unforgettable night in Chicago, everyone learned the same lesson. The world is transformed not by the people who ask to be seen, but by the people who never stop seeing others.